My wife and I had been together for about 5 years when everything fell apart. We met at a farmer's market and felt a strong connection with each other. I asked her out for drinks, and we had a wonderful time. We ended up dating for about a year and a half before we got married. I never thought I would get married before I met her. She flipped a switch in my brain, and I realized how great something like that could be. We had discussions about starting a family after we were married, and we were both in agreement that we wanted children. After about 2 years of being married, we decided we wanted to start trying. Of course, at the beginning, we were just doing the normal way without seeking any medical intervention or anything like that. My wife was monitoring her ovulation and making sure we were sleeping together at the prime time. However, nothing was really taking. After a while, we decided it would be best to speak to a fertility doctor. They worked with both of us to help us find the cause of our problems. I gave them a sperm sample, and it turned out that I had some fertility issues. Long story short, I went for a physical and was diagnosed with cili disease, which has a major effect on sperm motility. There was a chance that after I switched to a gluten-free diet for celiac that I could bounce back from it. It wasn't the complete end of the story for me fathering my own children. However, my wife seemed impatient. I understood why she would be. She was in her 30s, and she wanted to have 3 children, so she needed to start soon. The longer it was put off, the more risk there would be in each pregnancy. We talked about more options. There was IVF with a sperm donor adoption and freezing her eggs. They were all very expensive. Some time went by, and I had been on my new diet for a few months, feeling great, and my wife wanted to start trying again. I don't quite think she understood how everything would work for me. I didn't think it was going to be such a quick fix after changing my diet like she did. But lo and behold, after a few months of trying, she got pregnant. It was very exciting for both of us. She found out she was pregnant later than she would have liked. But all that mattered was we were finally going to have a kid. During the pregnancy, my wife was acting off with how excited she was to get pregnant. I thought she would enjoy it. I knew that she was likely to have a lot of mood changes and things of that sort, but it almost felt like she couldn't stand being around me. Honestly, I thought she looked down on me because of the issues I had with getting her pregnant. I hated feeling that way, but that could have also just been some of my own insecurities. I noticed that she was getting a lot of phone calls that she was being very secretive about. I would be in my office and hear her whispering with someone on the phone. She would be texting with her phone, obviously, facing away from me. And she would step away from me sometimes when she would take calls. It started rubbing me the wrong way, but it didn't say anything about it. One afternoon, I was sitting on the couch next to her when she left her phone behind before going to the bathroom. Ever since she had been pregnant, she took a lot longer in the bathroom than she normally did. So I knew I would have a couple of minutes to look through it. My curiosity had really gotten the better of me. When I looked through her phone, I found a conversation between her and another man about her pregnancy. I didn't know who it was right away, so I scored through the messages looking for any indication of who they were. What I gathered was that he was a man who she met online and had sex with. At the very top of their message exchanges, they had a clear conversation about how she was going to meet up with him exclusively for unprotected sex so she could get pregnant. He agreed to it, and in that conversation, mentioned how they wouldn't contact each other after. Even after that first meeting, they continued to meet with each other. They were continuing a sexual relationship through their messages, as well as in person when they had the opportunity to. What bothered me the most about all of that was how she told him that she was pregnant a day before she told me. Of course, it wasn't my child, but I thought it was up until that point. In the recent messages, he kept mentioning how he wanted to be in his kid's life. My heart was completely in my stomach when I was reading all of that. My wife told him that wasn't an option. He knew what their deal was when they got together. She wanted to get pregnant, so she hooked up with a complete stranger to do so. The guy was practically begging her to consider being with him. I sent myself as many screenshots of their conversation as I could. and I put the phone back down before my wife got back. I pretended like I had just been called into work so I could leave and avoid being around her. I had a lot of things I needed to figure out, and I didn't want to be around her to do it. I went to my sister's house, and I told her about everything, showing her the messages that I had. She was as shocked as I was about it all. She was the one who pretty much convinced me that I had to leave her. I met up with her the following day, and she introduced me to a friend of hers who was a divorce attorney. We started putting everything in motion so I could serve her with the papers. I didn't know anything about the guy she cheated on me with. So I tried to do some digging to find out who he was. He knew that she was married when they hooked up, and I just thought that was disgusting. I found out that he was the owner of a small home renovation company. He mostly serviced local houses, but it seemed like his business was really picking up. After everything was settled with the attorney, I went to my wife and I brought her the papers. She was shocked to see what I was doing. I told her that I didn't want to be with a cheater, and she understood that I found out what happened. She tried to make it seem like it was my fault that she cheated. She tried to make it seem like it was my fault that I had a disease that affected my ability to conceive a child. She made it seem like I forced her hand into cheating. I didn't want to hear any of it, so I just ignored her lame excuses and told her that I would see her in court. As for the man she slept with, I decided that I was going to ruin his business. I left reviews on all of the social media pages, planning what happened. Everybody always looks at the one-star reviews when they're looking at them. I knew that I would get their attention. He countered by getting some of them removed, but I kept putting them up. I hoped that it would lose him a fair amount of business if husband saw my review about how he knowingly slept with a married woman and got her pregnant. They likely wouldn't want to work with him. My wife and I got divorced, and I found out through the grapevine that she and the other man ended up trying to be together. However, they did not work out. She had to move out of the house that we lived in together because she couldn't afford it on her own. And she had to have joint custody of her kid with a virtual stranger to her. I feel bad for the child. No kids should be born into the world with two parents who don't love each other. I know they're probably going to have a lot of issues growing up, and in some ways, I wish I never found out about this so I could have been there for them. But I'm glad that I got out before I was involved in their life anyway. The fact that your wife tried to blame you for her cheating because of your health issues is horrible. She was just trying to come up with an excuse to make self look like the victim in all of it when she wasn't. Cheating is awful as it is, but cheating on your husband to get pregnant by a stranger is ridiculous. Just from a genetic standpoint alone, you know almost nothing about that person. You wouldn't know what health issues their family has, mental health issues, nothing. That's something that you should consider before having a child, regardless of who it's with. That's why most people, when they choose to bring a child into the world, do it with somebody that they know and trust. I think it's ironic that they didn't work out when they're trying to be together. They clearly didn't know much about each other when they hooked up the first time, and now they're tied together for the rest of their lives. I do really hope that they can at least be cordial with each other for the child's sake. It is a real shame that they're going to have to grow up, seeing that as an example of a relationship. Now for our next story. My girlfriend and I had been dating for about 9 months when the lockdown first started during the pandemic. She and I had been working in the same office building, and I would see her from time to time. I always thought she was attractive, but it didn't go anywhere for a while because I was in relationship. When I broke things off with my ex, I decided to talk to my girlfriend. We hit it off right away, and we started dating each other. Things got pretty serious with us pretty quickly. We had actually been planning on moving in together when the lease was up her apartment. She had moved to our city for work and found a room available through some Facebook housing group. She moved in with 2 people that she didn't know very well, but after some time became friends. They weren't engaged couple. Let's call them Jack and Jane. They were renting out a spare bedroom in their house for extra income. I met them a few times, and they were really nice. They seemed to be really in love, and they were fun to hang around with. My girlfriend would invite me over from time to time and we would have game nights, cookouts, and things like that. I was also living with roommates at the time, for my girlfriend and me to come by. We were both looking forward to our leases expiring, so we could look for an apartment together. When the pandemic first happened, things were very difficult with our relationship. My girlfriend was asthmatic and I worked in healthcare at the time, so being together in person wasn't safe. She was very high risk, and I dealt with a lot of exposure on a daily basis. Our relationship was mostly virtual for the first 6 months of the pandemic. I actually ended up taking vacation time to quarantine so I could see her on her thing. When her lease renewal came up, we discussed a few ways we could be extra safe about exposure so we could live together. We figured it out and found a nice apartment together. Even though she was trying to minimize her exposure to the outside world, she would still visit her old house from time to time to hang out with Jack and Jane. During the 6 months where she was completely isolated with them, they had grown very close, even more than they were before the pandemic. She was visiting them more often, and it felt like our relationship was reverting back to how it was before she moved in with me. I wanted to spend time with her and show her that I loved her, so I was frustrated with her absence at home. I asked her about it one day when she came home from Jack and Jane's late. She told me that she missed living with them, and that was why she was there. I was upset hearing that because I thought she would be happier about living with me. She assured me that she wasn't unhappy living with me, it was just that she had grown very close with her friends and missed them now that they were apart. They had all gotten used to being with each other on a daily basis, and it was an adjustment for her. At the same time that was happening, we stopped being intimate with each other. As I mentioned above, we spent a lot of time apart at the beginning of the pandemic. I thought that when we got back together, things would be exciting for us. I was wrong. My girlfriend tried to make it seem like she didn't want to get too close to me because she was nervous about getting COVID. I understood that, but she wouldn't have been any more at risk of getting it through kissing me than she was sleeping next to me. I tried to explain it, but I didn't want to make it seem like I was trying to pressure her into anything. I could feel her growing distant, and I was starting to get nervous that maybe she and I were drifting apart. I saw a future with her, and it was heartbreaking to even think that, but I would have been naive not to. One night, Jack and Jane invited us over to have a game night like we did before the pandemic. This was after the vaccines were out and everybody was feeling much safer, so we were all excited to get together again. Jane and I both had to work until the early evening, so we set a meeting time around 7. I ended up getting to leave my shift a little bit earlier than I originally planned. I went right home to my apartment to shower and change like I always did when I got off work. When I got there, my girlfriend wasn't home. After I got out of the shower, I texted her and asked her where she was. I waited for about 15 minutes and she didn't respond. It was about 5:45 when I got home, so I figured she might have gone to Jack and Jane's house early. I decided just to head over to see if she was there. When I pulled up, her car was in the driveway, so I knew that I was right. I walked to the door and I froze when I looked through the front window. It was open to let the breeze in, and I could see my girlfriend straddling the other guy and kissing him on the couch. They were getting very handsy with each other, clearly about to have sex. I knew that they weren't expecting me to be there so soon. So they must have been taking advantage of the time they had alone. I was frozen in place. Everything that had been happening recently made a lot of sense to me. She was spending all that time at her old house. She was growing distant from me, and she didn't want to sleep with me. I figured whatever was happening between them must have been happening for a while. I took a couple of pictures before getting back in my car and leaving. I drove home and trying to figure out what I wanted to do about what I just saw. I wasn't going to be with my girlfriend anymore. She could move back in with the others if she wanted, for all I cared. When I got home, I sat down in front of my computer and an idea hit me. I knew the 4-digit password to get onto my girlfriend's laptop, and I imagined her Facebook was probably still logged in. I went to it and looked through her messages with Jack. From what I could gather, their relationship started while she was still living with them. At the beginning of the pandemic, she was having trouble paying her rent when she was laid off from her job. She told me that she needed to talk to the couple about that because she was nervous she would lose the roof over her head. I remembered her telling me that they had agreed to let her stay and paid back rent in installments. From their messages, I could see that he reached out to her and told her that they could work something out between themselves. From there, they had a conversation about sleeping together and keeping everything discreet between them. He had a nest egg savings account that he would use to cover her portion of the rent, so Jane didn't notice. He wouldn't lose money because her rent went into a joint account he and Jane shared. His partner never knew about what he was doing. I took a few screenshots of the messages and sent them to myself. While I was looking through her Facebook, I got a phone call from her. I lost track of the time completely and hadn't shown back up to their house for game night. I had no intention of going back anyway. She called me and asked me where I was, and I told her that I was about to call her because I had a horrible migraine and needed to stay home and unwind. She offered to come home and help me, but I told her I just needed to be alone in the dark. So she said she would stay and play some games with them, then come home later. The following morning, I reviewed my lease agreement and realized that I might have a way out of living in the apartment. I contacted the landlord and I managed to get my name off the lease so I can move out officially. I was going to be leaving it all in my girlfriend's name. After I was finished with that, I reached out to Jane and asked her if we could meet up because I had something important to tell her about her partner. She was really suspicious, but I asked her not to say anything to him because it could cause a lot of problems. She met me at a park, and I told her everything I knew. I showed her the pictures that I'd taken as well as some of the screenshots for my girlfriend's Facebook Messenger. She was heartbroken about everything. I comforted her for a while and eventually, we came up with a plan on how to confront them about it. There was a trend on social media at the time to have PowerPoint night. It was a gathering where everybody would throw together a PowerPoint presentation about something weird they knew too much about. So we made a group chat with both of our partners and a few other mutual friends that we had. Excited about the idea of it and said they'd be able to make it the following weekend. Over the week, my girlfriend was very excited about the presentation she was going to give. She put a lot of effort into her own. Admittedly, I didn't put half as much effort into my own because all it was going to be screenshots of her messages. The night finally came and everybody was gathered around the television in the living room. They were all expecting funny jokes and weird facts. But the title of my presentation was Quid Pro Quo Sexual Harassment with a picture of my girlfriend straddling Jack. The surprised look on everybody's face when they saw it was priceless. Without paying much attention to their reactions, I continued the presentation. I explained what it was and I used the examples as some of the early messages sent between my girlfriend and Jack where they discussed having sex in exchange for rent. I was about halfway through the presentation when my girlfriend finally came to her senses and turned off the television. She started screaming at me about how I embarrassed her in front of everybody there. Jack and Jane were having an argument as well. My girlfriend was angry with me for going through her Facebook messages. Everybody else was just sitting there watching, sipping on their drinks with wide eyes. I told my girlfriend that I was moving out of the apartment and that the rent was going to be her sole responsibility. Then I forwarded her the new lease agreement that the landlord had sent to me. She started crying and saying that she couldn't afford it on her own. That wasn't my problem anymore. As it turned out, the girlfriend of the couple owned the house outright. She had inherited it from an uncle who passed away and her partner was living in it without being on any kind of agreement. She kicked him out of the house. We both left our partners, and it was for the best in the end. My girlfriend and Jack ended up moving into my old apartment together. They stayed that way for about 6 months. And when the lease was up, they both left. From some of our mutual friends, I learned that they had tried dating, but it didn't work out. While they were dating, he was constantly messaging Jane and begging her to take him back. He kept telling her about how much he loved her, and my ex-girlfriend wasn't too crazy about that. Oh. It sounds like your relationship had a lot of problems. I could tell from how you were talking about the relationship during the pandemic that you really care for her. You even sacrifice spending time with her for her own health. It's a real shame that she did what she did. It sounds like she missed out on a great partner. It's very sleazy of Jack to have messaged her about the arrangement for rent, especially when he didn't even have his name on the house. He took advantage of being in a position of power over her, and that's creepy. However, the fact that they continued their affair after she moved out makes me think that she was already interested in him. I'm glad that you were able to speak to his partner as well. Neither of you deserve to put up with the affair that was taking place, and I'm glad you both got out. I think the PowerPoint presentation was a great idea. I can imagine everybody in the room was shocked when they realized what was happening. Thank you all for taking the time to. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me.